Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's a man, goddamn, is he?
Welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases presented by Community America Credit Union. I'm Joel Goldberg. Quick shout out to my friends over at Chief of Staff Kansas City. They are making connections that matter. Proud to have them as a partner. Check them out at chiefofstaffkc.com. Got a great episode here today, and sports and a championship mentality are at the forefront of what we do here on Rounding the Bases. And in our latest installment, I'm joined by a retired soccer pro turned coaching phenom, though maybe not in the sense you would expect. Leadership isn't about what you do well. It's about the way that you help those around you do things better. This is where my guest, Brian Roberts, excels, and he's played a firsthand role in coaching countless others to achieve their own potential, not just on the soccer pitch and not just in the workplace, in both, in the sports world, in the business world. As Lockton Company's Chief Diversity Officer, Executive Vice President, and newly appointed Chief Operating Officer of its Midwest Series, he continues to play defender of its culture and market position. Once a defender, always a defender. But his primary focus is on the talent and how he can help each and every individual achieve things even they didn't know they were capable of. Not unlike a sports coach, his commitment to the team is unrelenting. He also equips each player, or in Brian's case, associate at Lockton, with the resources and guidance they need to perform their best. And each win isn't just one for the team, but a testament to the leader who helped get them there. That is a long way of me introducing a phenomenal executive who went from the soccer world to the insurance world and never saw it coming, at least initially. Brian, how are you?
I am fantastic after that intro. Can you also write my eulogy when that time comes?
Yeah, and let me clip a copy of that and make sure that we get it out so that everybody can. I can even do the voiceover for you if you want, but we don't want to talk eulogies anytime soon. I love, and you and I were introduced by multiple people and went out to lunch, and I love your story. We all have stories to tell, but I think that what I love about yours, Brian, is that it was so unthinkable at the time, right? I mean, growing up in the neighborhood that you did in Los Angeles, and then moving away and starting this trajectory. And it all did kind of link up together. I mean, the pieces fell into place, but there's no way as a young kid in LA that you could have seen this happening, could you?
There's no way. I mean, if you think back of growing up in LA and my parents' focus on education, that got me to Yale and to the rest of the story. I mean, it was not something that I think you could have ever charted or planned on from where we started to where we are today.
So let's go back to where you started. I know everybody does like those little memes now about where you started and where it's at now, or however that thing goes. I never did one of those, but it's an amazing journey and one that I know you've worked incredibly hard for. But let's go back to the beginning, and then we'll talk about where you're at now, because you're doing so much in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, and much more with your new promotion too. But you're growing up in Los Angeles, and your parents decide to make a move that really changed your life, your kids' lives, and everything going forward. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we were growing up in South Central LA, and as things really started to get hot after the riots in LA and gangs started to really take hold, my parents made what now I understand is huge sacrifices to move us out to the Inland Empire. And so we moved out from inner city LA to a suburban neighborhood, which changed the trajectory of everything. It changed the types of schools we went to and changed the sports that we ended up playing, which is how soccer became. And so that move was the foundation of everything that's happened since.
So that starts you on the soccer path too. Was there any soccer in your background before you guys moved away from the inner city?
Not at all. I mean, as the day stands today, I started soccer late. Starting soccer at 10 today is, a geriatric beginning. Yeah. But starting at 10, went to school, and at recess they were playing soccer. And when I came home to tell my dad that I wanted to play soccer, he's like, no, we're a basketball, football, maybe baseball type of family. And so we're not going to play soccer. Eventually, I won that argument, and now it's funny. He's the one calling me on weekends asking if I saw the soccer goal. So it's definitely taken over our lives and changed everything.
And that's just the beginning of it. And I do want to hit one thing from early on that very much applies to today, and then we'll kind of jump back to the journey. But you were telling me that was a very early exposure to you about diversity, equity, inclusion. That, you move out of the inner city, where I'm guessing most of the people that you were in school with and around were kids of color, and then suddenly you move out and you're on this elite soccer team where you're surrounded by kids that are all from different backgrounds. I don't know how much early on you pay attention to that, but did you notice that at all?
It wasn't something that we noticed until we were about teenagers, right? And so what happened was I ended up on this elite soccer team that in Southern California is, even in that melting pot, is unique in that we have 5 Black kids, 5 kids of Hispanic descent, and then 5 to 7 kids that are white kids. And that dynamic in the elite soccer world is unique. You don't see that many teams with that level of diversity, certainly not in Kansas City, but even in Southern California. And so we started to see different things happen. It was the first time I was called the N-word, was on the soccer field. It was even very interesting to see how not only the other African-American players dealt with that, but how the white kids that had never had to deal with racism, and now they're on this team where we are the odd team out in the diverse makeup of our team, and now they're having to have different experiences that their Black friends have had to live with, or their Hispanic friends had to deal with. And it was a fascinating journey, and something that we still talk about when we get together today.
You're at a young enough age where you maybe don't understand the magnitude of it. Yet I always think that someone that is younger has this innocence to them and this ability to observe that sometimes us adults forget. How quickly was that shaping you, if at all?
Looking back, it shaped a lot. We went through some adversity as a team, and then myself as an individual, learning how to deal with different people, right? The best thing that happened to me was having Hispanic and white teammates, where we were going through some of the elite soccer games in the country and having to figure out how we get aligned on the same page. At the time, I wasn't thinking about, well, I've got to figure out how to work with a different race. But that was just a natural setting, and I think sports provides that, right? Sports and other extracurricular activities put us in situations that we don't know the learning when it's happening, but it's just created organically, right? So it definitely shapes. It's something you can see looking back, but in the moment, I wasn't aware of it. But powerful learnings throughout that process.
Yeah, you're like I said, you're too young to really recognize it in the moment, yet you're processing more than you realize at that age, because we're sponges when we're that young. And so here you are suddenly. The thing I love, Brian, about every step of your journey is that there have been these surprises along the way. I hope you're at a point now in life where you're expecting some of these things, like, hey, this is what I am. But if no one told you about soccer, how could you have known that soccer would be your career? And then each step of the way, right? I mean, even when you're talking about your role now in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and you're getting that early hand, you don't necessarily know it, but every one of these steps, when you look back at it, has to make sense, right? I mean, all the pieces ended up being put together. You just didn't know what that looked like.
They make sense now, right? The story is seamless now, but it's not something that you could have ever put together on your own, right? I think that whatever you believe, whether it's God or whatever higher power, I think that architecture is something that somebody put together in a very cohesive way. I mean, if you think about being on the most diverse youth soccer team you could be on, and then landing at Yale, where, let's be honest, I now was one of 3 on a team, and in a school where I was the minority by far, and having been able to lean on those experiences that I got as an 11-year-old when you go across the country to Yale. I mean, those things, again, not things I processed at the time, but looking back and having conversations with friends and family, you learn a lot about.
So the journey takes you to Yale. Eventually, you end up playing professional soccer. You're playing in Kansas City. And I love this story because your future at Lockton really involved you trying to make some money on the side because newsflash back then, and in some ways still now, professional soccer players in the United States don't make a whole lot of money, right? This is almost, it's funny because the professional soccer job, we're not talking about Premier League or something like that, but at that point, MLS, it's like a side hustle, but you have to put in more than the full-time amount of work to do it. So what do you do on the side? You maybe go and coach. And you started to get noticed as a coach. And this is what I, among the many aspects of your story that I love, that your leadership ended up presenting itself to the guy that ultimately would end up hiring you. I mean, it's an amazing story, which I know once again changed the trajectory of your life, even recently with new developments. Tell me how that all went down on the youth soccer fields.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I am the full-time role with the part-time pay is how I had the soccer career going, and I needed to pay off the student loans. And so I reached out to a friend who was coaching in town, coaching for the Kansas City Legends. And I was looking for, let me coach a teenage boys team. And they said, well, you have 9-year-old girls. That's what you get. I said, well, okay, that's it. And so I started coaching a 9-year-old girls soccer team. And by happenstance, Tyler Lockton is on that team. And Ron Lockton is her father, who quickly took an interest and came to me about, I'd say 6 months into it, after an interesting parent meeting. If you've been a part of youth sports, you know all parent meetings are interesting. And he came to me and said, look, I like the way you've managed this and handle it. I'd love to talk to you about coming and being a part of Lockton. At that time, I was new enough in Kansas City, didn't know what Lockton was still playing professionally, and was convinced that I was on my way to stardom. And so I politely declined at that moment. But 5 years later, I picked up the phone and said, yeah, it's, I think I need to have this conversation with you about an opportunity. And, here we are.
Even at that point, you can't imagine that you're going to move eventually into this executive role, and that keeps changing and changing, right? You're just looking for, I'm guessing I'm putting words in your mouth here, so feel free to correct me, a quote unquote real job. Not that the sports job isn't real, but as you mentioned, you're not getting paid like it's real. And so at some point, you got to figure out the reality. Who would have known that it would start this incredible career that is still very much on the rise? So when you went to Lockton, what were your intentions?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Let's get a job where we have some consistent pay, and grow. Really, it was about getting something more in my resume, getting that professional experience, and then figuring out where I could take that from there. And if you told me that 15 years later I'd still be in the commercial insurance industry, Joel, I would have told you you were nuts.
But now, if I were to tell you wouldn't be in there, you'd probably be devastated, right? This is your life.
I can't see myself pivoting anywhere else. I mean, it's a very quietly dynamic industry that I've found myself in, and allows me to do all the things that I love to do, that you alluded to earlier. So I'm very fortunate.
So let's talk about those, because you have multiple hats at Lockton, not to mention a new one and a move upcoming. I mean, this is all the beauty of growth and being promoted and all of that. So tell me about these multiple roles, because it's not just one specific role for you. You're doing a lot.
Yeah, so part of the role that I landed with initially when I joined Lockton was in an operations role. And for us, for lack of a better term, that's the business behind the business. So I don't day-to-day actually work in the commercial industry, commercial insurance side, but it's all of the management and the business behind everything that we do. And so a lot of that's the people side. We are a people business like most. And so that has turned into a very diverse role. I remember actually coming back and talking to Ron as I was about to accept this role, and he put it as the operations job at Lockton is you have to be the best athlete on the field. You've got to understand our insurance industry. You've got to understand people. You've got to understand the macroeconomic happenings, financials. And so my role takes me in a lot of different spaces. And then after the last happenings of the summer of 2020, I was able to bring some other passions that I had to the table after the murder of George Floyd. Making my voice heard quickly got me to the opportunity of being Chief Diversity Officer, which allows me to have impact on the entire organization in a space where commercial insurance really needs some help.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, the world of commercial insurance, is it safe to say traditionally has been very male, very white? That's pretty simple, right?
That is exactly right.
So do you think that the occurrences with the George Floyd murder, I know it changed everyone in some sense, could change people a lot more. Others, it was an awakening. Others, I think I've told you this, certainly people of color, wasn't news to them. Most people of color have experienced some form of that every day that since they've been born. So was it a turning point for us? I mean, suddenly you have more influence in a traditionally male white industry. Was it eye-opening enough to be able to make real change at this point? Because it feels to me like there's always been small change, but not really significant change.
Yeah, I would love to say it's a turning point. I think it was certainly a unique moment in time. And some of that uniqueness is the pandemic. The fact that it happened in a pandemic and in the moment of the pandemic when everything's frozen, right? So there is no basketball, there is no baseball, all of the things that distract us from the realities of our world were paused. And so I've talked about it as this unblinking eye that happened around the George Floyd moment. And so I don't know if it's a turning point, but I do think it's a watershed moment. If you look at history, there are several of those where it fast forwards our progress. And I think if we take advantage of this, we'll look back as a moment where we did fast forward, and what would have taken, a decade only took 3 years. But in all likelihood, it will still take 3 years to see the meaningful movement that we want to see.
But I do think that when you look at, I mean, there's some really encouraging developments here. As much as I want to be careful in saying that, because I mean, a life was lost here. Lives are lost every single day. And you mentioned the pandemic. I think the other part is, and this isn't new, but it continues to evolve, is that we're not talking about that incident without the cell phone and without the video and without the bravery of that young woman. And so that's the game changer, to the point where now I feel like anytime something happens with anyone, what's your first reaction? To pull out your phone, right? And so maybe that helps push things forward too. But I started to see a lot of chief diversity roles popping up if they didn't exist, or that role being redesigned or more focused towards it. And I've seen that with companies all across Kansas City and certainly across the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Because, as I said, you had a lot of other roles. You have a lot of other roles, but now suddenly you have this one, which is totally, in some sense, totally different. I mean, leadership is leadership, right? But this is to me different. This is big picture. This is moving the company, the community, the country forward.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think the increase in diversity roles, I'm hopeful that it's a good thing. And I say hopeful because it does depend on the heart behind that investment and how it's positioned. It's interesting because I think I've actually gotten some resistance or even some questions about, well, why is it that Lockton has somebody that's doing a part-time role? Why not go full circle? And I actually believe it's a more thoughtful approach for the company at the time where we stand, in that to hire, it would have been very easy to go outside and hire somebody that was a big salary, that had 10 years of diversity experience, and say, we've done it and check the box, so to speak. I think it actually letting me take that role, somebody that understands the culture and somebody that can quickly get movement inside the organization and in the communities that we serve, has helped us, right? And I've been very clear. It's not likely that I'll be the long-term chief diversity officer, but everything's about moments. And in this moment, we needed somebody that understood who Lockton was and where we needed to go. And at some point, I'll pass that to somebody else, and there will be another phase of our diversity experience. So I think it all goes down to, are companies doing what's right for them, or are they doing right optically? If they're doing what's right for them and the cause, we'll see the movement that we want to see.
Right. Not just eyewash, I always say that when you're talking about diversity, this is not a flip the switch type of thing or check the box type of thing. If it is, which, by the way, and I don't know that you and I talked about this, but I feel strongly about it, that's culture too. I mean, culture is not a check a box, okay, we're good. Culture is, oh, I think we figured this out. Now let's continue to look at it tomorrow and the next day and the next day, because you don't ever take a day off from this. You can't, right? And so I think it's really interesting that, especially knowing what I do about Lockton, and Peter Kloon's a past guest and featured him in my book, and so he talks so much about the Jack Lockton way, and I know that when you walk into Lockton offices, certainly in Kansas City, but I think probably anywhere around the world, if you don't hear about Jack Lockton right away, someone is not doing something right because of the culture that he started too. So I think it's fascinating that they made a decision that we need to be internal here with someone that understands the Lockton way to be able to now push things forward in terms of where we're at societally.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's the world of sport or business, culture wins the day. And so that was a key part of the decision. And then the conversation with Peter about what do we do with this diversity role. And it just came down to the ability to have the influence and the trust inside the organization to then hopefully get us moving on progress. And we're making progress. We're not there yet by any step, but we're certainly moving the needle.
Before I get to my baseball themed questions, tell me about the most recent promotion too, as if you don't have enough else going on, but this is a good thing for you because again, more growth. Next step, you say you can't envision being anywhere else. Well, you keep growing and growing and growing, and with this company where you just sort of started for a job. So tell me about the new promotion.
Yeah, so I've accepted a role of Chief Operating Officer over our Midwest region. That includes Chicago, St. Louis, and other cities throughout the Rust Belt portion of our country. It's more growth, to your point. It's a bittersweet move for me because I have grown up in Kansas City with Lockton, and that is where headquarters is. But the opportunity is awesome. It's a chance to really put my stamp on a culture and on a business and continue our growth. So it's an exciting move that we'll be entering on here over the next few months.
Yep, heading to my hometown of Chicago. Let me hit you with the baseball themed questions. You did say your dad said basketball, football, maybe baseball, but not soccer. It's not really baseball questions. Although I don't know, were you a decent baseball player or no? Just out of curiosity.
I was a decent baseball fielder. At the plate, as soon as the ball started to move and they started throwing curveballs, I was toast. Better
to use the foot, I guess. I know you could do that with the soccer ball. Okay, baseball themed questions. Professionally speaking, in your career, what's the biggest home run you've hit?
The biggest home run I hit. So it goes back to actually a decision that I made. The decision to leave soccer. And it's an interesting moment because I could have continued to play. But the move was to get out of soccer and kind of give up the dream. And I was talking to my wife about this, and that moment changes everything because to stay and play at soccer, I think I could have played another 4 to 6 years. But to get out of that and to quickly get into a world of professional the professional environment. And even though I only went into the front office of sports, that move in and of itself prepared me for the move to Lockton. And so I really look at that as a watershed moment in my story, that a decision to let it go what I loved and still love playing soccer today, to go into selling tickets. I think that was a home run. And no one would ever say that, but that's the biggest home run that put me in a position to do this.
Gave you a taste of the business side too, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Swing and a miss. What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken professionally, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so we talked about the COO opportunity in Midwest. I was up for the opportunity in the Kansas City series, and looking back at that, the approach that I took to that, and having been in the organization for 12 years, there was an arrogance and an assumption that, well, clearly I'm going to get that. Clearly I'm going to get that job, and that's not what happened. And looking back, and that was 3 years ago, the learning that I've had since then, and having to go through that swing and a miss and that strikeout, if you will, about how to approach opportunities, how to be cognizant of where you are. That swing and miss has been the biggest learning opportunity I've had.
And then the last baseball theme question: small ball. What are the little things that add up to the big results for you?
Yeah, I love this, and I love that your book's theme is this, because it's when I look back at my successes, it's all been small ball. And so I think of it as the consistency of the little things in personal relationships, the cup of coffee, the unplanned text message checking on somebody. Those little things go a long way. And it actually, just having another conversation about leadership, is it about being caught or taught? And the caught piece is all around experience, and the experience that we create as leaders. And so those small things is what catches people. It's what gets them to run alongside you. And it's that consistency of those little things that I really focus on.
Couldn't agree with you more. And it's fun to keep learning these little elements every single day. Small ball doesn't stop either, as far as I'm concerned. All right, I have 4 final questions as we round the bases. The first one will be this. I've always felt like, and I know plenty of people that have gone Ivy League, and I was definitely not one of them, but Harvard, Yale, those are the two that get the most attention, with all, due respect, which always feels like a way of saying something mean about someone when you say with all due respect. But people don't talk about Penn or Brown or all these others the way they do Harvard and Yale. I guess it's the history and all of that. But when you went off to Yale, what were the reactions from family, from the people that you grew up with? I mean, you'd moved on to a safer neighborhood and all that, but your roots were in the inner city, and now here's this kid going to play soccer at one of the most prestigious academic institutions in the world. What were you hearing from people?
Man, you hear the gamut. You still hear the gamut today. Yeah. Whether it's there's certainly a lot of people that are very impressed. There are certainly some people that said, well, you sold out when you went to the suburbs, and now you've really sold out when you go to the Ivy League. The reputation that comes with an Ivy League school is really unique. It's something that people are impressed with, but they also feel like you're rubbing it in their face, right? It's an amazing. If I wear a Yale pullover, people are like, oh, you got to tell everybody to go to Yale. But if someone wore a Jayhawks pullover, no one would ever say that, right? So there's just an interesting dynamic about the Ivy League schools. But I'll tell you, it's worth it, and it's been worth it in the people that go there, right? That's the most unique thing about my time at Yale is the diversity of people, and not using racial diversity here, but just the world that converges in those places is what makes those places special.
I know that we all in the television world are guilty anytime we have an athlete that is a former Ivy Leaguer. There's never a mention of his name that doesn't come up where the topic of intelligence doesn't come up. Oh, he's the smartest one. Oh, I wonder what molecular biology course he took. Like we don't talk about guys that went to my school that way. Wisconsin's a pretty good institution, by the way, but you're more likely to talk about the party scene at Wisconsin. I don't know, but they don't do that for the Yale grads, and so I guess that follows you ever. I mean, we've never had someone from Princeton. I left Princeton out. I should have put Princeton there before too, but we've never had someone from Princeton on the baseball field or wherever it is where we didn't talk about their education. So
yeah, that's part of it. But look, it's an honor, right? It's an honor to have attended those schools and honor to be talked about that way.
All right, second question, on the lighthearted side, I guess, too, but you did mention your dad saying, did you see that goal? Who or what are you watching, if you do, on the weekends in terms of soccer?
I tried. I stay watching MLS because while I know people will have opinions about the brand of soccer played, it's where Americans get opportunities. And so it's got to be something that I support. We'll look to find some season tickets when we move to Chicago. I love watching Champions League, and I will watch all of those, but I still very much support sporting and MLS and try to continue to support that brand, and hopefully everybody else does as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you want to talk about culture, such a great culture that they have over there. I would add the same now for the Kansas City Current, and I'm looking forward to having a couple of their players on towards the end of March before their season begins, and celebrate Women's History Month. But I think that this is such a great soccer town. I will say that lately my son has gotten me into, and I grew up a soccer player, not at your level. So I'm one of those guys that's in another sport that doesn't bash soccer. I like soccer. I understand how people find it boring if they didn't grow up with it, but all you have to do is start to pay attention to the nuances, like you would baseball if you've never seen baseball, and you start to understand it. He has me watching Premier League now and watching Chelsea. So I said I'll adopt a team, but it's got to be someone that's good, because otherwise I'm going to get frustrated with that team, and that's who he watches. I don't know why. So I've been watching them twice a week. It's fun. I mean, the level of play and just the enthusiasm from the fans, of course, people know that is just it's amazing. It's like NFL, Sundays here.
Yeah, it's incredible. And being a fan of Chelsea is not a bad thing. I have followed Newcastle, who are the perennial underperformers in the Premier League, but I'm sticking with them.
You got to stick with them now at this point. All right. Third question as we round the bases. If you had not had this offer from Ron Lockton and gone this route, where do you think you would have ended up?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't have a great answer. I would have probably leaned into coaching on the soccer field before Lockton. So I interviewed to be a producer, decided not to do that, and then for 9 months went and started my MBA and was starting to coach at UMKC. And so I think I would have found a way to get in to leverage that MBA professionally, but coaching would have always been and still is something that's near and dear to my heart.
All right, last question. Let's focus on leadership, just overall, but also in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, because I think that great leaders can help motivate people, obviously, help usher in change, even if it's as slow as change can be in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion. But how much have you been able to take in all your leadership roles with Lockton, and certainly in terms of diversity, from the soccer pitch, whether it be from those years as a kid, or whether it be at Yale, or whether it be playing professionally in Kansas City? Because I always feel like the leaders in sports, they have the ability to do things in the business world that others don't. They've been under fire. They've been in the middle of it. They have to make quick decisions. They have usually a diverse group of people around them. Look at any locker room generally. How much did that help shape you as a leader? One, and two, how important is that in terms of moving this needle?
There's so much I learned from. I can't even describe how much I've learned from the sport of soccer, whether that be being on a team, being the captain of a team, and a lot of it is working under pressure, right? And that's the beauty of sport, is that pressure presents itself on a consistent fashion, whether that's in practice or in a game, and then dealing with the failure, and not the loss of a game, but the failure in a moment in a game, giving up a goal and then having to rebound seconds later and make another good play. But then coaching takes it another level, right? And it doesn't matter which level, right? You can learn a ton by coaching this 5-year-old T-ball team in terms of how people respond to your message. And so much of leadership is about influence and about speaking to your audience. And we all know speaking to a 5-year-old T-ball team is so different than speaking to a room full of executives talking about diversity. And so all of that was something that I learned through the game of soccer, on the field and off the field. And every day it provides me, again, another lesson that I lean on from that time.
All right, so those are the rounding the bases. Great lessons. I've got one final follow-up that I want to hit you with, because I've been asking a lot of people this question. It's fascinating to me. It's really about dreams and about the journey. I started the podcast talking about the journey because I don't know that anybody at 6 years old, 8 years old, we all have dreams. I mean, from the time we can remember, we still have them. It never plays out exactly the same. Like I knew at maybe as early as 8 years old that I wanted to be on TV talking about sports. I didn't know that it looked like pregame, postgame for the Royals, but beyond that, I didn't understand that then would give me a platform to be able to have a podcast, to be able to speak about culture, to be able to moderate panels on diversity, equity, inclusion. So it opened up all these other doors that I could have never seen coming. We've kind of chronicled that throughout this podcast with you too, about how unbelievable this journey has been. Recently, I had on Tech Nine, and I thought it was fascinating because he said that growing up, he wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They didn't teach the classes. He stole the books. He studied it. And he said now all these years later, as a rap star for quarter of a century, he has people coming up to him saying, "You saved my life with this song. You helped me with this." And he said, I've actually become my fans' psychiatrist and ended up going. So we never really know where this goes, right? And that's what I tell kids all the time. Follow your passions, be open-minded. And so I'm just curious, when you were that kid growing up in the inner city, what were your early dreams?
I was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a doctor, and specifically a neuroscientist, or a neurologist, excuse me. And that was the dream until the moment where I decided to leave Yale and go play soccer for no money. I had gotten into med school, and I remember calling my parents, telling them that I was going to defer my med school to go play soccer, and at the time make $12.50 a month. Only during the season. And you can imagine what they said. You're going to do what? And then continuing that to the point where I had to let my admission lapse because I played 4 years and never going back to med school. So I was going to be a doctor, and that was the dream. And nothing against the doctors today, because obviously they're working through some of the toughest times to be a healthcare professional. But that was one of the great decisions that I made throughout the journey.
And again, all kind of linked together. I mean, a little bit like tech in the sense that you had other thoughts, but here's where it took you, and now in the end, okay, maybe you're not a doctor per se. I have no doubt you could have done that, but look at the influence you have on so many people, and the way that you can change lives. So it's amazing. I don't even want to say it's come full circle. You're still going, but it's amazing just to watch the way it all develops, and I'm sure that there are moments. I know for me, this is true, where you have to pinch yourself a little bit and say, I can't believe that this has all worked out the way it did.
100%. Blessing is the best word that comes to mind, and got to keep working hard and making sure we keep on the track.
I know you will. Congratulations on the upcoming move and all of what you're doing. Really appreciate you spending the time, sharing all the insight. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for all you do. Appreciate it.